Hi, thanks for joining. We talked earlier about setting goals and establishing our resolutions for the year. And it's time to look back and think about how are we tracking our performances so we can maximize all of our responses so we can reach our goals. But before we get started, please make sure you're subscribed. Please make sure you're liking what we're putting out there, giving us a 5-star rating and reviews, sharing what we have produced with everybody that you know. So, how do we know that we're making the goals that we need to make? How do we know that we're reaching what we want to reach? How do we know that we are meeting our resolutions? A lot of it has to do with how we go about tracking our progress. And so, what's being tracked when we start looking at tracking our progresses? What we're talking about is things like body weight and BMI, body composition and waist to hip ratios, blood glucose levels, heart rate, blood pressure, our cardio endurance, our muscle strength, our muscle power, our flexibility. Those are all the factors that we're looking at when we start looking at what types of things are we going to track in order to establish, are we reaching our goals? Are we able to establish the resolutions that we had set for ourselves? So let's talk about what we're looking at when we look at what things should be tracked and what things should not be tracked. But more importantly, why is it important to know our progress?
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy!
So we start thinking about how we go about tracking our fitness. A lot of us think about what we do in terms of a clinical approach or conversations we might have with our physicians about certain metabolic conditions that we might have. But it's more than just that. So what are the things we're going to be looking at? So the first things we're going to look at are things that relate to body weight, body composition, and measurements that relate to body weight and body composition. Why do we use these measurements? Well, simply, it's easy. It's one of the easiest, quickest, and least expensive analysis that we can do as relates to our overall performance and our overall fitness. What do we need in order to complete these? Because once again, we're looking at tracking ourselves, not needing somebody to track us. Well, we need a scale. We need a body composition analyzer, and we need some sort of fabric or movable tape measure. What else does it tell us? So what are we getting at when we start looking at body weight, body composition, and other types of measurements of our body? Well, body weight tells us nothing more than how much weight we have, how much mass we might have. Body composition is going to tell us the relationship between fat mass and fat-free mass. BMI is going to tell us our body mass index, which is the relationship that we have between our height and our weight. Waist to hip ratio is going to give us a relative girth of our abdomen. That is what is the relationship between the width that we have in our torso. Some of these are good measures, some of these are not so good measures. And so what are we looking at? We actually start looking at these factors. What are the BMI telling us? And so the BMI is telling us the body mass index, and that is simply a scale that we have that is going to relate how much weight do we carry relative to how much height we happen to have. We tend to use this measurement as an indication for obesity, even though it is not the best measurement that we can use. Body composition is looking at the relationship that we have in between our percent body fat, as seen in the table, and our percent fat-free mass, which is going to be 100 minus or 1 minus what we happen to have here when we start looking at it as a percent or as a decimal. And so we start looking at body composition. We tend to look at things like, am I lean? Am I ideal? Am I average? Am I above average? When we start getting into the above average, this is where we start looking at in terms of the World Health Organization, ratings for obesity in terms of indication. This is where we start looking at when we start getting into the average and above average, the indication that fatness is overtaking fitness possibly within our measures of risk for non-communicable or metabolic diseases. Waist to hip ratio is the indication of the relationship between the girth of the waist, which is going to be measured right around your belly button, and the measurement of your hips, which is going to be measured right around the widest spot of your hips, which is at that side bony spot that you have on your hips, which you can feel if you put your fingers on your hip and start kind of moving your thigh back and forth. You'll feel a little bony prominence there. And what we're doing is we're going to set up a relationship, a ratio between how wide is my waist relative to how wide is my hip. Now, we start looking at these measurements in terms of indications of risk factors. The waist to hip ratio is a better indicator than the BMI, even though it is not the best indicator, simply because we can see waist to hip ratio stay relatively stable. That is in an excellent and good value, but have increased amounts of body fat and have a higher BMI than we had at the very beginning. And so we start looking at the waist to hip ratio, this excellent, good average ratings that we get with the waist to hip ratio. What we're really looking at is the relative risk for developing cardiovascular disease based off the waist to hip ratio. Now, while we have all of these, what are we actually getting away from these measurements? So yes, they're very easy to take. They're non-expensive, with the exception of some of the body composition analyzers, usually running in the neighborhood of about $30 to $50 for some really good ones. But most everything else is pretty cheap to use in terms of body composition and body mass in terms of a measure for fitness, which is why physicians like to use it, healthcare providers like to use it, because it's a quick, easy screen. But the problem is that it's a quick, easy screen that actually doesn't allow for good prediction outside of a relative risk evaluation. The problem with all of these is that by utilizing BMI, by utilizing body composition, by utilizing waist hip ratio, what we're doing is we're overweighting, no pun intended, body mass, body weight to indicate health. While it does provide an estimated relative risk for chronic diseases, it does raise the risk of body image and weight bias issues. Body image and weight bias issues, which we've spoken about ad nauseum, and we are currently in the process of publishing a couple of journal articles on, is a real issue. It's an issue that, even though we start thinking about body positivity and those aspects as it relates to body image and body weight, we still have, because we use these measures and over rely on these measures because they're cheap and they're easy to do, and they provide, at least as a correlative value, an indication for relative risk, we over rely on these values. And because we over rely on these values and we take quick snapshots of individuals and say, oh, that person has more fat than the other person does, and what we do is we start seeing these values as the indicator for health. And because we start seeing these values as the indicator for health, it leads to body image issues. It leads to weight bias issues that can lead to eating disorders, along with the over-reliance on the caloric balance as the end-all be-all of my nutrition, which we know cause eating disorders amongst individuals. So we know we can do a lot better, and we don't need to have big fancy equipments in order to do this. You don't have to use big fancy equipment. You don't have to go to specific places to get tested. We can evaluate our strength. We can evaluate our aerobic fitness without needing large amounts of equipment or large amounts of money to do so. We'll start by looking at muscle strength testing. And when we start looking at muscle strength testing, what we're really going to do is look at the multi-joint large muscle group exercises, where we're going to progress through a standardized progress. We're going to start with a warm-up, then we'll rest for a couple minutes. And then we're going to start with a set of 10 reps. And then we're going to rest. And then we're going to, after the end of that 2-minute rest, we're then going to say, okay, how easy was that weight to do when I first started doing it? And then I'll add 10 to 20% based off of how easy that was. Once again, just rough metrics. If you already are lifting, you kind of already know what weight do I start struggling at. And that's the way you're going to start your testing at. And then you'll perform one set of 3 to 5 reps, no more than 5. At the end of the third rep or at the end of the fifth rep, you're going to stop. You're going to rest somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. Based off of the ease by which you're able to complete the fifth rep, you'll then add additional weight. We usually say between 5 and 10%. But once again, it's all about your own subjective value there. You're then going to perform another set of 3 to 5 repetitions. And you will simply repeat this cycle. And you'll repeat this cycle for a maximum of 5 total sets. Because once again, we're not looking at doing an endurance test, we're looking at doing a strength test. And then what you're going to end up doing is based off of how close can I get to that 3 to 5 repetitions. I'm able to establish what my strength is based off of plugging it into equations. And based off the equations, I'm able to determine my estimated 1 repetition. Unless you're an actual strength athlete, unless you're actually doing competitions, there's no real need to do a single repetition in order to determine your actual maximal effort, your maximal strength. The closer I get to 1 repetition, the more rest I need and the more likelihood of having an injury, which means I have a greater risk for injury at that higher weight. If I am already very strong, the need for a spotter that is well trained comes into play. And if I don't have knowledgeable lifters working out with me, I run the risk of injury by not having an appropriate spotter. Now, the nice thing with this strength testing is that I don't need to do this for every exercise. I do this for the large multi-jointed exercises or the complex exercises. And I can use what I have and I can determine based off of what value I get on my weight and the number of repetitions I've completed, such as here with 3 repetitions, and based off of the weight that I'm using, say 250 pounds, I know that my estimated 1 repetition will be 285. Now, if I'm able to get all the way up to 5 repetitions, I'm going to have a slightly higher weight. And so what's that higher weight going to be? Well, if I'm able to do 250 pounds for 5 repetitions, my estimated 1 repetition max is now 298 pounds. And so what I'm able to do is I'm able to establish what is my muscle strength without having to get myself all the way up to that near 300 pounds if I'm able to do 250 pounds for 5 repetitions. And what I can do is I can use this regression, I can use this mathematical estimation for my 1 repetition to track how strong I am throughout my training without actually needing to repeat the standardized testing procedures. So if I know I'm going to be doing sets of 5 and I want to see how much stronger I am, instead of doing 250 pounds, I now jump up and do 260 pounds. And that 260 pounds, if I'm able to do 5 repetitions, is now giving me an estimated strength capacity of 309 pounds. If I'm able to do 265 pounds, that gives me a strength capacity of 315 pounds for that specific exercise. And so we always use this based off of specific exercises, once again, without having to go through and do all of the exercises. Once again, we pick those multi-jointed exercises in order to determine that max strength level. Now, if we are trying to be bodybuilders, if we're trying to be athletes, and we're going to have specific training recommendations and specific training modes where we have to get to max strength for a whole bunch of different exercises, then we go about and do test those specific exercises. Now, there's other types of strength testing. We can go ahead and do grip strength testing. And so we know that there is a good relationship, particularly for older individuals, that indicate maintenance of a strong grip leads to better overall health performance. And so how do we go about testing our strength testing? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to sit with a hand grip tester with our arm flexed at 90 degrees to the elbow so that our forearm is parallel to the ground. We're going to place the device in our hand and secure it, but not start squeezing. So we want to make sure we start at 0. We're then going to squeeze as hard as we can and hold for a count of 3 seconds. We're going to record the weight that we're able to get. We're then going to rest for 2 minutes and repeat 2 more times, and then we'll average out those 3 trials just so that we have a value that we have. We're then going to switch hands and do it again. Now, we can go about and get and purchase these hand grip dynamometers. That's the hand grip testing that we use. And these will run you $30 to $40, depending upon how fancy you want to get and where you want to go and get them from. But some of us don't have that $30, $40 to spend. Well, if we're going to track our body weight, we have a scale. We have a bathroom scale. And we can use the bathroom scale the same way that we can use a hand grip dynamometer. The only thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a bathroom scale that's able to read in kilograms, because that's what the standard values that we have for hand grip strength happen to be in terms of the designation of good, poor, etc. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have our same position that we had for the hand grip dynamometer, but this time we're going to have with the bathroom scale in our hands. And what we want to do is we want to squeeze one hand, same exact procedures, and then squeeze on the other hand. So we'll start with, say, our dominant hand, and then we'll work to our non-dominant hand. And if you don't happen to have somebody there to record what you're doing at the time, you just want to make sure that the dial of the scale is facing you. Now, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing when you're dealing with a hand grip test is you want to make sure that the distance for the squeeze is appropriate to the size of your hand. And so we can very easily change the caliper on the hand grip dynamometer. But for the bathroom scale, this is where we have to get kind of fancy. This is where we might go about using some towels to change the distance that we start the grip at. So what we want to do is we want to start the grip where our fingers are curled but not already clenching into a fist. So we're able to pull into a fist while we're doing the hand grip testing. And so for the bathroom scale, adding some towels around the scale, but once again, making sure that we're not applying any load to the scale to make sure we're starting at 0 still, is very important. If we can't start at 0, then we want to make sure we know where we start so that we're able to determine where do we end, and simply just subtract those 2 points in order to figure out what is our actual strength test and what's our strength measure. And so what can we tell from our grip strength? Well, what we're really looking at is we're looking at grip strength as it relates to weak, normal, or strong. And we have age breakdown and gender breakdown in this. And so for most adult females, there would be any female older than 20 years of age, we want to make sure that they're gripping at least 22 kilograms of grip strength. For males, we want to grip at least 37 kilograms of grip strength. As we start getting older, some of that grip strength is going to start to drop. And so as we start to age, we start seeing slightly lower values for our minimum numbers for grip strength. For females, once we get to middle age, we want to be able to grip at least 18 to 19 kilograms of grip strength. Whereas for males, we want to grip at least 35 kilograms of grip strength. Once we start getting into kind of retirement age, for males, we want to grip above 30 kilograms. And for females, we want to grip above 18 kilograms. And that's because that breakdown of where we start seeing that weak indicator is where we start having to worry about overall strength and overall mobility freedoms, because the whole idea in terms of fitness and performance for the older individuals, which we'll talk about in a whole separate talk, is about independence. So those are the easy strength tests that we can do. And once again, we don't need a lot of fancy equipment to do a lot of these things. Most of us have gym memberships or have the ability to find weights. Most of us have a bathroom scale or will buy a bathroom scale in order to track. But what about knowing our endurance? And this is where we have a couple of caveats here, because some of us don't like to run. And that's fine. We can still measure our endurance without needing to know or the ability to have the ability to run. And so we start looking at aerobic fitness testing. There's two easy ways of doing this, and they're both distance tests. And so we have the Cooper's 12-minute test, where we're going to start with a warm-up. And then based off of a determined running route with minimal street crossings, or using a treadmill, or in some cases using the local school track, you're going to run. And you're going to start by recording your heart rate at the very beginning. You're going to start your timer, and then you're going to walk or run at a pace that you can sustain without changing that pace for 12 minutes. At the end of the 12 minutes, you're going to record both your heart rate and the distance that you covered. And this is where having our devices with us, where we can track our distance. This is where knowing how many laps we're running or walking or on the treadmill and using the distance indicated on the treadmill. And so based off of the Cooper test, what can we determine about our aerobic fitness? Well, the more distance we cover, the better our aerobic fitness. And so whenever we look at aerobic fitness, we're measuring it in what's referred to as VO2 max. That is, how much oxygen can I inhale and utilize based off of millimeters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute of activity. Now, if we start looking at this, as we start getting closer to that 2-mile distance, we start running at 6 minutes and faster in terms of our mile pace. We start getting these huge aerobic fitness numbers. And that's because the 12-minute test is not great for people who are already at very high levels of fitness. It's good, but it's not great, simply because when I start getting closer to running at and beyond a 6-minute pace, that means I'm able to cover more than 2 miles in my 12 minutes. I start getting some numbers that are very, very high, that may not be physiologically possible or may exaggerate my aerobic fitness. And that's where we go into a secondary test. And we can use a secondary test, and this is my 2-mile run test. And once again, just like with the Cooper test, we're simply going to utilize a determined 2-mile route that's going to have minimal street crossings, or we're going to use a treadmill, or we're going to use a running track. We're going to record our heart rate at the beginning. We're then going to start our time, and then we're going to run once again at a pace that we can sustain for an entire 2 miles. At the end of those 2 miles, we're going to record both our heart rate and the time necessary to complete the 2-mile course. And just like with the Cooper's test, we're going to get our aerobic fitness based off of our VO2 max. And we start seeing some more realistic numbers for people who are going to be running at faster paces. Now, once again, just like with the Cooper test, if we start noticing, as we're able to complete the course in faster amounts of time, we have higher aerobic fitness. And so what the aerobic fitness and what the endurance values are telling me from my aerobic fitness tests is it's telling me how well can my body use oxygen, how well can my body transport oxygen, how well can I do gas exchange at my lungs. What is my aerobic fitness? The more active I am, the more aerobically fit I will be. And that's because I'm going to be able to have better cardiorespiratory responses, and I'm going to have higher amounts of mitochondria in my tissue, to utilize that oxygen that's being delivered, which means I'm going to be more aerobic in my activity. Now, some of us don't like running. And because some of us don't like running, it's very hard at times to test our endurance. So, how can we test our endurance without running? This is where we have things like the 1 minute as many as possible exercises. This is where we have things like the burpee tests. This is where we have things like doing a cycle test, riding a bicycle. So, as many as you can do in 1 minute test, like a push up test, where you're going to warm up. You will have a partner track your repetitions, or you're going to record your 1 minute of exercise so you know how many push ups you're able to do in the 1 minute. You'll start at the top position. You'll lower your body down to the bottom position. This is where you pick. Is it going to be chest to the ground, such as the new Army push-up test? Or is it going to be where your arms are going to be parallel to your body, parallel to the ground? You'll then push yourself up. You will continuously do push-ups for 1 minute, counting each full repetition. You can pause at any point in time in this 1 minute in order to rest, in order to catch your breath. And then you will simply repeat the test once you're able to catch your breath and continue, or until that 1 minute time elapses. So what are some good measurements that we have? And ACSM is able to give us some good measures. And once again, it's age and gender stratified. So if I am young, I should be able to do more push-ups than if I am older. If I'm middle-aged, I should be able to do more push-ups than if I'm older, but less than if I'm younger. So someone that has a good musculoskeletal fitness, 18 to 29, should be able to do somewhere between 37 and 46 push-ups for a man, somewhere between 30 and 35 for a woman. If I am in adulthood, say between 30 and 40, I should be able to do 30 to 40 push-ups as a man, 25 to 30 push-ups as a woman. As I get into older adulthood, say 50 to 59, I should be able to do for a man 20 to 25 push-ups. For a woman, I should be able to do 17 to 20 push-ups. These are the same types of exercises that we used to do, or that we still do in some of the presidential physical fitness testing that we talked about previously. Other tests we can do sit-up tests. Now, when we start doing sit-up tests, we're not looking at doing full sit-ups. We're looking at doing more crunch sit-ups, where instead of going all the way up into the full sit-up position, we're only going to go up into the crunch position, which means we're simply going to roll so that our shoulder blades, our scapulas, roll off the ground. Once again, having a partner track what you're doing, or record so that you can count if you lose count while you're doing them. Starting from the bottom position, you start your timer and you simply do continuous crunches for 1 full minute. Once again, just like with the push-up, if you need to take a rest, you take a rest. And then you continue from the point of rest, but you don't stop the timer during the rests. Once time has run out, you simply will look and compare how many you were able to complete to, are we good, are we poor, in terms of sit-ups. And so if we start looking at our sit-up tests, once again, age and gender stratified. And once again, we'll use that good value in terms of what we're looking for. If I am an adult male, somewhere between 20 and 40 years of age, I should be able to do somewhere around 40 to 45, 46 sit-ups in a minute. If I am a woman of the same age group, I should be able to do somewhere between 30 and 43 sit-ups. As I start getting into older age, I will be required to do fewer in order to contain a good value. So let's say I'm between, say, 50 and 60. For a man, I should be able to do somewhere between 30 and 34 sit-ups. Whereas for a female, I should be able to do between 20 and 23 sit-ups. And once again, we're simply looking at this in terms of an evaluation of what is my local muscle endurance as an indicator to my total muscle endurance. Now, another test that gets run is the burpee test. Now, the burpee was designed as a means to evaluate cardiorespiratory fitness, not as a means for exercise, even though it is currently used by a host of different types of personal trainers and different types of exercise influencers and exercise program designers as a actual exercise to do within your exercise regimen. But that's not the purpose of the burpee, which is why a lot of people don't like burpees, because we start to do these burpee ladders. We start to do these burpee periods, and we start to do these burpee periodization programs and these burpee circuits. And that's not what the burpee's for. The burpee is simply a means by which in 1 to 3 minutes, we're able to evaluate based off of stratification our relative level of cardiorespiratory and musculoskeletal endurance and fitness. Now, in the burpee, what we're simply doing is we're simply going to start in a standing position. We're then going to squat down, put our hands on the ground, put our feet out backwards. So we're making a starting push-up position. We then bring our feet back under us and we stand back up. We don't jump. We don't do push-ups. We simply are going to squat down, hands to the ground, feet backwards into a push-up position, and then stand back up. And we're simply going to count the number of cycles we're able to complete, or the number of repetitions we're able to complete in 1 minute or in 3 minutes. We have some normative data for adults. In older adults, the 1 minute test is what we're looking at, where we simply have a below average, average, a good to excellent, and excellent grading based off of the work of Royal Burpee, who developed the test, where less than 15 is below average, 20 to 25, we're looking at average, 30 to 40, we're looking at good to excellent, and greater than 45, we're looking at excellent in terms of cardiovascular and musculoskeletal endurance and fitness. Now, the 3 minute test has been established through research, particularly for younger individuals and active individuals, where we have grading of very poor, poor, average, good, and very good. For females, 15 to 26, very poor, 26 to 37, poor, 37 to 60, average, 60 to 72, good, 72 to 83, very good. For males, 28 to 38, very poor, 38 to 47, poor, 47 to 66, average, 66 to 76, good, 76 to 85, very good, over a 3 minute time frame. Now, just like with the as many as possible, with the burpee test, you can take rests. However, taking rests does not stop the clock. Now, there is some speculation that we're able to establish our aerobic fitness simply off of our heart rate, where we're going to take our heart rate using a monitor or simply doing a pulse count by basically finding the pulse at your wrist, taking that pulse count for 60 seconds, or using your monitor. We're going to record that number. We're then going to utilize our age predicted maximal heart rate. And it's not the 220 minus age, but it's the 208 minus 0.7 times your age value. We're going to take the value that we got from that 208 minus 0.7 times your age, and we're going to divide by the heart rate that we got and then multiply it by 15.3. And what that heart rate only value gives us is an estimated VO2 max, an estimated aerobic fitness. Based off of the original research on this regression, the standard error was similar to other indirect measures, Cooper test, 2-mile run test, 1.5-mile run test, which means we had a variance between the estimated number and the number that we actually measured through the laboratory of between 2.7 and 4.7 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute. However, subsequent tests have noted, and subsequent analysis have noted, that it's a not applicable test for older individuals and for untrained individuals, simply because the standard error is very high, greater than 5.2 to 5.6%. It's poorly correlated with the actual measured VO2 max, the actual measured aerobic fitness. We only have a correlation of about 40%. R is going to be less than 40%. R is less than 0.4, which means that we have a bias and a skew in the evaluation of aerobic fitness utilizing this measure, that is the relationship of my age predicted heart rate to my resting heart rate or my non-exertional heart rate in older individuals and in untrained individuals. Now, if I'm older or if I'm untrained and I want to use this evaluation, meaning I don't have a lot of training or a lot of time in order to establish what is my aerobic fitness, or I'm hesitant because of some sort of limitation, this value can give me a starting point to determine heart rate range for training, but is not valuable for determining what my overall level of aerobic fitness happens to be. And so what's the take-home message here? First off, we want to limit the use of body weight, BMI, or other weight measures to track gains. We know that utilizing these things lead to body distortion issues and body image issues. It also leads to a lot of comparison of body image, particularly across social media platforms. We know that the caloric balance and the energetic issues are not the best in terms of establishing weight loss parameters or in terms of establishing body mass issues. We know that by focusing on gains and focusing on performance, we're able to establish goals for the long term. So we want to track strength changes. We want to track endurance changes as means to establish goals and as means to change those goals. We don't need a lot of fancy equipment in order to perform these tests. We don't need a lot of fancy equipment in order to track our changes in performance. We know that tracking lets us train at appropriate levels so that we're able to establish the correct training levels to cause the specific adaptations to impose demands that we need, as we've spoken about previously in the talks on periodization. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you got a little bit out of the conversation. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you got a little bit out of this conversation about how we should track our progress and how we can test in order to establish that tracking. There are links within the description that you can use to use for tracking your own performances. Please make sure you're following us on all of the various platforms that we're publishing on, here on YouTube as well as on the podcast, written words in Substack, and our short takes on Instagram and on Threads.